Welcome. You're listening to the Ask Brien Radio Show on KHS 1220 and 98.1 FM. We've been doing this show. Actually, we had a pilot in December 2016, and then they said, wow, you guys are really great. And we started our show first week in January 2017. Seems like yesterday. Anyway, we have our co-host, Traci. Traci, you there?
I am here. Yes, I am here. Yay. What a welcome back. I love that. Thank you, Andrew.
And you know what?
Of course.
I think when you announce what his job is and you tell him about that, I think we're going to have the same exact replication. Anyway, Traci.
Well, as we should.
Well, I know, but it shouldn't be an exact duplication. Remember, this is a real audience. We have a real studio audience here. I see 5 ants right behind him. Right. Anyway. They're all clapping. Now he's checking. All right. Don't be paranoid. All right. So, why is Ask Brien spelled Brien? Because when we went to school, I had Brian Janelli, Brian, Brian Swanson, Bryn. Nobody was Brin unless they were part of the O'Brien family who lived down the street and, or the O'Brien pub. But otherwise, nobody spelled the name Brien, Brin. So why is a show called Ask Brien, Brin, Traci?
Well, you mean other than the fact that was the URL that you could get that was available?
Hey, those are trade secrets.
No, of course that's not the answer. The answer is because all of our E's are exceptional, but no one more exceptional than our engineer.
Oh, thank you. You're too kind, Traci.
That sounds exactly like the last audience.
That was a different one, different studio audience.
Yeah. Same level of enthusiasm, that is for sure. So no, in all seriousness, we are all about the E's because we are all about our experts, and our experts are people who are supporting our entrepreneurs through education. And if you really force me to do the math on that, Peter, which I know you always do, an expert is by definition, by most people's definition anyway, a 10,000-hour minimum of time spent investing in your area of specialty or expertise, which would take, if you really wanted to break that down, would take approximately 40 hours a week, 52 weeks a year, 50-ish weeks a year, and that would be about 5 years. But we know entrepreneurs are never really able, especially in the startup mode, able to do that in 40 hours a week and 50 weeks a year. So we estimate that shortcuts that learning curve down to about 3 years. But most of our experts who are fabulous, especially our one today, have been doing their area of expertise for years and years and years, and we are here to help the entrepreneurs learn from all of our life lessons, mistakes, and successes to help prevent you from having them, right?
Well, what if you don't have any mistakes?
Well, you would feel that way because you don't have much empathy.
Never heard of that
ego.
word. Never heard of empathy.
Yes, I realize that.
I have heard of arrogance.
You've heard of what?
Arrogance.
Oh, that didn't start with an E, so I wasn't even sure what you were saying.
Well, hold on. Some people may spell it incorrectly. Arrogance.
All right. Well, we are very, very, very enthusiastic about our expert today, right?
Well, I'd yell excitement, but I'm a little hoarse today, so I don't want to do that.
Oh, good. Okay, thank goodness, because
I'll bring in a ringer.
Everybody is grateful for that.
Where's Louie? All right. Well, without any further ado, how do you spell ado?
A-D-I-E-U.
And why do I like that word?
Because it's all vowels, one consonant, and I don't even know why that matters, but that is why.
Different folks, whatever. Remember, this is the Sesame Street for business. All right.
Yes, yes. But our expert today is going to be really helpful because he's going to help entrepreneurs understand how to get the kind of benefits that one might be missing out on if they were trading their corporate life for entrepreneurship. So we're going to be having a really good conversation about that, especially if you filed a tax extension and your return is due in a couple weeks. Asking for a friend.
Yes, October 15th. All right, so let's bring him on board. Stuart, you there?
Steve
Yes,
Stewart.
I'm here.
Welcome, Steve.
Steve.
Thank you for including me.
All right. So first, we want to go a little bit about your background, and then we have some serious questions to ask. These are all serious too, but people don't know who you are. So first of all, if you can explain to the audience a little bit about your background. When did you start in business? What did you start doing in business? A little bit of your background and some experience before, so we can have a summary of your background.
Sure. I'll try to keep this short because, sometimes people's bios get to be really boring. I started a mobile DJ service back in the 80s, and it was my foray into the self-employment, even though it was only a side hustle, but at least it got me introduced to, doing tax returns, even with a small business. And then in the year 2000, I started a new career that allowed me to travel a lot. And while I was doing that, I started getting into listening to podcasts and on-demand radio. With all of that, got me into learning about personal finance. Got a certification to train Dave Ramsey's Financial Peace University course. Also, the coaching there. That was all in the mid-2000s. And then in 2010, started a podcast about personal finance that really took me right into the podcasting medium. And that's where I am today. Instead of coaching people on personal finances or teaching people about personal finances through podcasts, I now edit podcasts for others who do similar things, investing, insurance, all kinds of budgeting, and those types of financial topics.
So between being a mobile DJ and then working with the Dave Ramsey part, you said in 2000 you started traveling, but you didn't indicate what you were doing. What was your job then?
Right. For that, it was an internal audit position for a major company based out of California, but I was doing a lot of traveling and stuff on the Midwest and the East Coast to audit their books and to audit their units.
Cool. Was that a franchise?
Yeah, very boring.
Was it a franchise or a company? Hold on. You want boring? I started out at Sherwin-Williams. Try counting paint or letting paint dry.
Oh, yeah.
Still around, by the way.
Watching paint dry.
Yeah, exactly. Anyway, so a couple questions. So how did you switch over from internal accounting into personal finance and podcasting? Because it is slightly different. It's the same area, but there are slight differences.
No, it's actually quite different. I mean, the internal auditing was more bookkeeping, procedural reviews, looking at some anti-theft type of procedures, making sure that the units were taking care of their books and of course their inventory. But the personal finance just came from learning more about money. I thought my wife and I thought we were doing well. We got married in the year 2000, and my wife drew up a budget, and it was weird. I'm like, yeah, that's nice, honey, but then I kind of let it go. A couple of years later, we went to go buy a car. She wanted to trade in her Jeep and get a new Jeep, and we didn't have enough money for it, and it got me angry. I was like, wait, we should be doing better than this. I know we should be doing better than this. So I got angry about our money situation and decided that's it. I swore off my debt, cut up my credit cards. This is the year 2007 now that we paid off all of our consumer debt, had no credit cards, and just used cash or cash equivalents to buy everything and be purposeful with our spending.
So let's go into that question. And as we said, Dave Ramsey has that philosophy that, pay cash for everything. I don't know how that, I really don't know how that can work on a house in California where, in Los Angeles, the average price or median price is about $800,000. So I'm not really sure that can work for everything and everywhere, right? Paying cash for everything. I mean, sometimes you have to take out the 15-year mortgage or something. But
Agreed.
let's go more into that. Listen, it's not just that people want to use the credit card to do things that they don't have the money for. It's they've got kids, and they got a lifestyle. And yes, maybe they don't need to have the brand new BMW, but many people, it's not just keeping up with the Joneses. It's my kid has to take swimming lessons. I don't want my kid not to know how to swim. My kid wants to take karate classes. His friends are all in soccer class, whatever. I got to have a child care. I mean, there are certain things that, really make it difficult to do everything on cash. And so sometimes people feel that, yes, we have to live within our means, but also we don't, your child is not going to be 5 forever. When they're 25, you can't really tell them, okay, you know what? Now I got the money in the bank account, so now I can teach you how to swim, things like that. So is that an ironclad rule that you live by, or is that a rule that you just think that should apply in many circumstances? Something like credit.
It is a rule I live by. I don't impose the rule on anybody else. It's just my belief system aligns with that. And I completely emphasize starting with the letter E, on what you're saying there, because kids are expensive, but so is life. And when you're talking about living what I call a cash-based lifestyle, an anti-debt lifestyle, you're thinking more about how you're going to pay for something rather than I'll put on the credit card and deal with it later. And that's what a lot of people end up doing. And then they end up rolling into this credit card debt that becomes a trap, and it's harder to get out. Yes, it's hard to stay out of debt. Yes, it's hard to live on a cash lifestyle, but it's also hard to get out of credit card debt. And that was what I realized back in the mid-2000s when I decided that's it, I'm done. I decided, okay, I'm going to do everything I can not to use any debt products and see how it goes. And it worked. It actually was a little bit easier than I expected. And I just was able to keep going. And I think anybody who, obviously, if you've got some kind of a traumatic medical, an accident or something like that, might throw you off. But those are the types of things that happen in life that hopefully you prepare for. And that's what we're doing. We're preparing for the unknowns, because there's always unknowns around the corner. So saving for emergencies, saving for those larger purchases like cars. We did not, for the house that we're in now, we moved to Colorado in the year 2024. We did not have enough to pay cash for the house. And you were mentioning this earlier. But what we were able to do was we had been saving up to pay cash for a house if we could. But we were able to qualify for a very large mortgage because we hadn't sold the original house that had been paid off yet. We were living in that while we were still buying this other place. We had to qualify for this mortgage. My wife was not earning any income. It was just me. And it's self-employed income, and banks usually don't like that. And here's a guy who has had no debt, no credit. There's nothing on his credit report to say he's credit worthy. So I had to go through alternate methods of proving credit worthiness, which isn't as difficult as most people think it would be. And we were able to qualify for the mortgage to buy this place. And then when we sold a place in St. Louis, we paid down that mortgage. So our mortgage is much more reasonable now. And I'm hoping to pay that off early too. But it is possible.
So you have an entrepreneur or business owner, and he's got a business. He's got a business idea. He's got the concept. He thinks it's going to work. Well, in the beginning, that first year, sometimes if you want to do that, you have to have credit, right? If you don't have credit, you may not have the ability to pay for everything. So do you think that person should wait, or do you think that person should start the business if that's what their passion is and they think it's successful?
Well, most businesses, or at least small businesses, start and it costs less than $5,000 to get started. And a lot of people, especially these days, you've got the internet and a lot of services where it doesn't require a lot of hardware and tooling up. I mean, you got a computer and the internet. But a lot of services are built that way from those things. So it would be possible for a lot of people to create a small business and start with very little cash required. Now, if you're opening up or buying an existing laundromat, let's say something like that, yeah, there's going to be some capital needs there, absolutely. But what's interesting about trying to live a cash lifestyle is that you try to think of alternative ways to be able to get what it is that you're looking for. So if I were to buy this existing business this coin-operated laundromat or something like that. Let's just say I'm going to make up numbers, big round numbers for people to follow on the radio, $10,000. Let's say that's what it's going to cost me. We could work out an arrangement with the owner to say, hey, I'm going to keep you, as part owner, or you'll be able to, keep some kind of a liquid position, or we're going to pay you out of the profits of the business over a 5-year span or something like that. There's ways to arrange these deals that isn't just, oh, here's a check with $10,000, or I borrowed $10,000 from the bank, here it is. There's alternative ways of doing it. You just have to be able to be creative with it. And I've heard these stories from other people too. It's not something that I just made up. This is stuff that actually exists out there. So it's interesting. If you can come up with alternatives, you'll find better ways to acquire things, to be able to start businesses that doesn't require any kind of a debt product.
Well, all those companies that are issuing bonds on the stock market, I guess that would be an interesting concept to have. I don't want to go too far into this. We only got 2 more minutes before a break. But since you have a lot of experience in this area, I thought maybe let's go over a starter's budget. We always talk about monthly budgets. I can because I'm an accountant, and lawyer, and attorney, etc. But not everybody does. So let's say somebody wants to do a budget. They're going to write down, food, shelter, whatever. So they're going to write down their house rent or mortgage. They're going to write down, the utility bills. Then they're going to write down the food, and then so let's just go over something simple because you got to create this budget for this new family, the Widget family. I don't know if you know the Widgets. They live down the street. So Dave and Marsha Widget. So all right. So they got the rent and whatever. They got the utilities. Okay. Food. All right. They're a family of 4. They've got 2 kids, 6 years old and 3 years old, and then the 2 parents are 40 and 38. Okay. One parent works at a job, and so he's eating out with his colleagues every day. Okay. Let's just do a food budget. How do you do that?
Yeah, well, one thing to do is you look at your previous purchases. You can just pull down a bank account, credit card statements, whatever you're using, see what you have been spending, and that becomes the basis for forecasting what you're going to spend. And then just be more purposeful with the things that you're going to spend your money on. Try to stick to that. And, of course, then you can do, just like in Profit First, the Profit First method is great accounting for a small business and large businesses, saying, okay, we're spending a lot in this area. Let's trim that down just by a little bit and see how we go. And then from there, you can just put more money in the things that you want to spend money on and put less money in the things that you don't want to be spending that much money on.
Okay, so let's say we get the food and shelter, right? Because those are the 2 things you need, right? I guess clothing doesn't really apply to an adult, but it certainly applies to kids 6 and 3. I mean, unless you have hand-me-downs from a cousin, you're going to have to spend something, right? By the way, we've got to take a quick break. You're listening to the Ask Brien radio show on KHS 1220 and 98.1 FM. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're listening to the Ask Brien radio show on KHS 1220 and 98.1 FM. Like no other station in the world. You don't like no other station in the world. Where's a crackpot like me? Come on. All right, let's go. Steve, you still there? Or did I
am still here.
Chase you away? All right. I'll have to try harder next time. All right, so, Steve, we were going over budget for a very important reason. All these things for personal finance, etc. You have to start out with what we're going over was a household budget. So other than home, food, clothing, if you have kids, obviously adults, only if you have sufficient income. What other items would you need on a family budget? And then we're going to go quickly to a business budget.
Sure. Well, why don't we'll look at it like a 30,000-foot view of a budget. We're saying we're going to bring in, let's say, $5,000. No, let's say $4,000 a month. It's kind of a round number that you can think about $1,000 a week. The first big category is going to be those set expenses, the things that are regular every single month, things like rent or mortgage. Maybe your cell phone bill is about the same every month. Maybe electric and cable and internet. Those things are a set amount. Those are easy to be able to just jot down and say every month we spend this, and this, and those things. Then you got the variable expenses, the living expenses, what I call them, the groceries, the gas, the dining out, buying certain things to repair or maintain the house, things like that. Those are the variable expenses that do take a little bit more attention to forecast. But if you categorize those and pay attention to those, you're really going to make a dent in what you're spending versus what you could be saving. And saving is another thing that you could be putting on your thing, is putting money aside for emergencies, putting money aside for those future purchases. I call them non-monthly. Like we pay our car insurance every 6 months. If we put a sixth of the payment away every month in savings, after 6 months, the money's there. It's a lot easier to make, we'll say, $1,000, car insurance payment after we've saved $200 a month for 5 months or, whatever it takes for 6 months. Of course, there's things like car repair that you're just the unknowns, the emergencies, putting money aside for that. Those are the type of savings goals. And then there's investing for retirement, which if somebody's listening and they're employed, they probably have some kind of a benefit through work that could be coming out even before the paycheck comes home. Or if you're like me and you're self-employed, taking money that you receive and then making a good decision on how you're going to invest that, whether it's for retirement through some kind of tax-favored plan, or it's through some kind of a brokerage savings for things like just future purchases, like we were saving for the house for 5 years or longer. So those are the big things that you'd be thinking about when you're creating a budget: is your set expenses, those monthly variables like gas and groceries and eating out. Then you've got your things you got to save up for that aren't monthly, and of course the emergencies and savings for things that are unknown.
So in those fixed expenses, I think you hit it a little bit, but just to make sure, auto insurance. If you don't have an employer-based insurance, then you need to have medical insurance, right? Those are the two big ones, I would think: auto and medical. And then if you own a house, then I think you got to have coverage so something happens, right? Those would be the big ones to me. If you're renting, you can get a renter's insurance. You don't necessarily have to unless it's required, but those are the insurances that I would think of. Anything else?
Yeah, well, starting off with the health insurance, that's the big one. And people who might be turning out, they talk about insurance. I mean, health insurance was the reason my wife kept working a day job. She thought that we couldn't get it. But with the Affordable Care Act that was passed, it was pre-COVID. it was more than a COVID ago. Makes, getting health insurance easier for people who are self-employed, who don't have that benefit being provided and organized by an employer. That's the first one. Dental and vision is also a nice option that could be covered through insurance. And then you talk about life insurance and disability. There's all kinds of insurances that we'll probably talk about in a little bit. As a self-employed person, it's really important to know there are these things that you can obtain as a self-employed person that aren't being provided to you by an employer.
Well, and even disability, right? I mean, if you're the only person earning an income for your family and you're 38 and something, God forbid, should happen, you need to figure out a way that you're bringing in something, right?
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's a mandatory thing.
All right, let's go. That's put that on the side. Now let's go to a business, okay? You're a self-employed person, so you can probably get this, and this is your business model. So for a self-employed person, what does a self-employed person need if they're starting a business tomorrow for their budget?
For benefits or just for bookkeeping? And there's a lot of variables
No,
here
for
about if you want.
A main budget. Okay. First of all, you have no idea what you're making. That's always scary, right? In your first, right? It is. I mean, when I started out, my first 5 years, my budget had to be adjusted a lot because 1 month I had a great month, and then 2 months I had bad months. It's like not so easy to figure that out.
Mm-hmm. Well, a lot of self-employed people have a variable income. Now, you could set it up to where you get cash flow that's regular. You get pay yourself every 2 weeks like you would a salary job, a certain amount. And then there's also owner draws you could do from profit or just pulling money out of a business. That's something that becomes more complicated than I think we can cover on the radio. But it is very scary for someone like me who it's going to be variable every single month. I could look at I got a top-level P&L spreadsheet, and it's telling me 1 month I made like $3,000 more than the other month. And when it drops, it gets scary. And then when it's, the money's coming in, you're like, woohoo, what are you going to do? That's where having some kind of a plan for the money that's coming in really pays for itself. And what I mean there is I like to have it'd be like an emergency fund for personal for a household, but I call it retained earnings for a business. Putting money aside for those future purchases. Someday, I'm going to have to replace this computer. Someday, I'm going to need to get this standing desk replaced or repaired, or, we're going to a conference next month. It's going to be $2,000 out of our pocket for flights and travel and food and all the things. These are things that it just really devastates checkbook if you're not saving ahead for it. So retained earnings is really important. Then, of course, having the operating expenses. Maybe you've got subscriptions to services that you use in your business. We'll just use the example of accounting software, FreshBooks, QuickBooks, Wave, whatever it is. You've got to have that money coming, put aside so that when the bills come, again, I prefer not to go into debt for things, so I'm going to have that money put aside so when the bill comes in, it's paid for automatically out of my checking account. It's already taken care of. Those are some things that a self-employed person needs to definitely look for. And then, of course, all the benefits. You want to think about the things that you're not getting from an employer that you would want to have for yourself. We talked about the insurance. We could talk about retirement, things like that.
Well, we only have about 30 seconds left. How many months worth of emergency funds do you think you need personally and for business?
My preference for personal is anywhere between 3 and 6 months. That way, if something happens where you're taken out of the workplace for either being, let go, or you're looking for a new job and something happens, or you're injured, that's always good for taking care of things. You don't have to worry so much. And then for business, I kind of like the same thing, 3 to 6 months, having that for those set expenses that we were talking about earlier.
All right, we got to take a quick break. You listen to the Ask Brien radio show on KHS 1220 and 98.1 FM. Well, thank you very much, Jen, and Legal Steps. And we're back with our show. You're listening to the Ask Brien radio show on KHS 1220 and 98.1 FM. Traci, take it away.
Yeah, you haven't heard very much from me today because I've just been over here taking very detailed notes of everything that Steve Stewart is saying because I think it's such valuable information. So I have a question, Steve. You've hit the highlights of, especially in having these operating savings accounts for personal and business planning and all of the things that we need to do to kind of meet the expectations of the expenses of our businesses. But I guess my big question is, if you're a startup business, what is the best way or finance hygiene, best practices? Like, how do you start this out of the gate so that you are set up for success in this way?
When you're starting a small business? Obviously, the first thing I do is get clients and make sales.
Yes, very, very important. But the money,
yes, marketing.
Let's assume the money is coming in. I'm talking about more the finance hygiene aspect of it. The money's coming in, and you want to set yourself up for success to have these savings accounts in place to be able to plan and just not spend everything or more that's coming in.
Sure. Well, when you first start out, it's always just a crapshoot. It's a variable that nobody can predict because you never know what kind of expenses you're going to need. There's always going to be something that comes up that you weren't expecting. Oh, I need to do that. Oh, I need to get that. Things like that. But I'll use the example of when I started my business. I want to say fell into a career as a podcast editor, but it wasn't my intention. I just ended up being one. Fortunately, I already had all the gear. And we talked about when I was podcasting, I had mobile DJ equipment that helped me get started with podcasting because I already had a microphone. I already knew how to use this stuff. With the small business that I created for podcast editing, it was a computer, knowledge of the software, things like that. But then there were some expenses that I needed to pick up with subscriptions to certain services and things like that. And, of course, education is involved with that, too. So I was paying for a little bit of coaching and education at the same time. But when it comes to you've established the thing, at least gotten past the first speed bump of getting the thing going, I like the Profit First method, which Mike Michalowicz, I think he introduced it through his book back in 2016 or something like that. Fantastic method for thinking top level of how to separate the income that you got coming in. And it's also helpful when you're trying to do what I do, which is anticipate the expenses, have the money there for these expenses so you don't have to use debt or go into debt to finance things. And his process also forces you to think about profit. Now, a lot of people think that, I make money, I pay my expenses, what's left over is profit. Well, what Mike Michalowicz did was give us a method that kind of flips that on its head. And the first thing you do is kind of pay yourself type of thing, but you're just putting money aside. It's just a little bit of money aside, and you call it profit. And you set that over here, and you don't touch it for like 3 months. The other categories then are things like your operating expenses. So it's those hard costs, those regular costs, those subscriptions, the things that you know you're going to be paying for every single month. You have a little, we'll say a side account for your operating expenses. Then you've got to have money put aside for taxes. This is the biggest killer of small business out there, is income taxes, at least in the United States. I don't know what's like overseas, but I don't think anybody overseas will listen to this. Income taxes is the biggest problem for small business owners, because not only do you have income taxes, but you're paying both sides of Social Security and Medicare. And that's another discussion we can get into later if you want, if we have the time. But you're actually going to end up spending more in taxes, but you get the benefit on the other side, which is you get to be your own boss, which I think is really fantastic. Yeah. Now, the one thing I didn't mention is that you also have to have an account put aside. I allocate a certain percentage of my income every time somebody puts money in my account that goes to what I call it payroll. It's basically an owner's draw. It's paying myself an actual income. So you've got that little bit that you put away for profit. You've got this chunk you put away for taxes. You put a chunk away for your operating expenses, which is more of a known variable. And then you also have this chunk going over to what I call payroll, and that's what you take out and you pay yourself. And I just do it twice a month, pull money out on the 15th and on the 25th and send it to myself. And that's how I'm able to then finance and budget everything that we do in our household here.
Okay, so how do you do this with multiple different accounts, or are you managing this all in one account? Like, that sounds crazy to manage.
Right. If anybody listens to the original book by or reads it by Mike McCullough, he says to open up these separate bank accounts. And part of it is because you don't want to touch certain things and you want to separate it from your operating account, which is the main one. But there are services out there that are basically you open up one bank account through this one service. I use a company called Novo. He recommends something called Relay, and you open it up, and you're able to kind of divvy out these buckets within that one account that makes it easier for you to manage all these things.
Well, we got to take a quick break. You're listening to the Ask Brien radio show on KHS 1220 and 98.1 FM. We'll be right back. Welcome back. You're listening to the Ask Brien radio show on KHS 1220 and 98.1 FM. And Traci, you were asking some questions to Steve, and we haven't finished.
Yes, so I before we get into more specific questions, you've been such an amazing guest, and I know you don't do traditional financial counseling for people. You have an amazing, very robust podcast editing business, Podcast Editor Academy. So if anyone wants to get in touch with you, I'm sure they would love to pick your brain for details about what you shared with us today. You've been so generous with your time. But how can people get in touch with you, and what would be the best way for them to reach out to you for all of the things you're fantastic at?
Sure. The good news is that all my editing is within that personal finance space. That's where all my clients come from. So I'm just involved with the whole personal finance thing. So I could still talk about this. But if people want to find where they can follow me on social or reach out to me, everything's at my home base, which is Steve Stewart. And that's 2 E's in Steve and 1 E in Stewart, following the method of earlier. SteveStewart.me, another E. Can't get the .com. The guy's owned it since 1997, but SteveStewart.me is where you can find my home base for pretty much everything.
I love that. Okay, you gave us such a teaser on one of the biggest challenges are the tax situation, the Medicare situation, Social Security. Let's spend a few minutes digging into some of your best tips for just breaking that down and getting a better understanding of it.
Sure. The tax is a moving target every single year. Things are changing. We've got the big, bad, beautiful bill, whatever it's called, that just passed with a whole bunch of changes. Tax breaks here, things that change, expire old ones there. For a self-employed person, the target just keeps changing. So what I found that works best for me is to make sure that I'm always getting ready to file quarterly estimates. So a quarterly estimate is something it's not too hard to do. You could do it a few different ways. One way is to do an actual calculation based on what you did bring in for that quarter, or you can average it out throughout the year. If you've got a history with a small business, this is what I'm doing now. I know that we'll say my tax bill was $12,000 last year, and that's about $4,000 per quarter. Well, now I know in 3 months I need to save up $4,000, send it to the IRS. Next quarter, $4,000 sent to the IRS. And then by the end of the calendar year, I should have a really good idea of where my taxes would be. I could do a quick little just a calculation online to say, okay, Steve, you did more this year than you were expecting. You did more than you based that $4,000 per quarter estimate on last year, so you owe another $1,000. Well, I've got a couple of months to get together that $1,000, so that by the time that I'm filing my taxes for the previous calendar year, I've got the money to just pay it off. And then, of course, that resets whatever I'd be doing for my quarterlies for the next year. That, for me, is the easiest way to go, although a more accurate way would be to say, okay, this year, for this quarter I made $20,000 this quarter, and I made $21,000 that quarter, and then the other quarter I made $16,000. That's the more accurate way, but I like to even it out just because it helps me to be able to save things for it. And if we're following the profit first method that I was mentioning earlier, we're taking money from every deposit. We're taking a certain percentage. Let's say it's 20%. Taking that 20%, putting it into a savings account, and that savings account's earning interest, whether it's big or little, it doesn't matter. It's making a little bit of something, but it's always waiting for me to be able to take it and then send it off to the IRS.
Okay, that was amazing. I think we would be remiss if we didn't touch on retirement. Just in these last few minutes we have together, what is the best way for a business owner to, we don't have the opportunity for a matching 401k. We are our own matching 401k.
Right.
So what is the best thing you can plant the seed, and what phase of business do you need to be in before you start this process, and how do you even start the process of planning for retirement as a business operator?
Well, talk to a fee-only financial advisor. Take a couple minutes of their time. That would be a good benefit. But then again, it could be something as simple as opening a account at one of the big brokerages and then getting into just index funds or mutual funds, things like that. Those are something that there's a lot of information online for it. There's a lot of good reasons to do something that's a mix of investments, so you don't have to sit there and try to pick the right stock, and that takes a lot of time. So if you're a beginner, going with a company that's one of these brokerage accounts, I'll just name some of the top big ones that people know: Vanguard, Fidelity, Charles Schwab. Open up a retirement account. Now that could be, this is where it gets to be tricky, and I know we're not going to be have the time to go into it, but you want to find an account that works as a retirement account. You put the money away, it grows. You can either get a tax benefit now or you get a tax benefit later. So that's the difference between doing a traditional IRA, which is where you're going to get the tax benefit now, or if you want a tax benefit later, let the money grow and then not pay taxes on it when you take out. That's something more like a Roth IRA. But for self-employed people, there's solo 401ks, there's solo IRAs, there's SEPs, self-employed pension plans, things like that. Talk to an advisor and get some more advice on things like that.
Well,
I love it. Thank you so much for taking your time today to educate us in really a great, simple way to break things down, which is one of the reasons why I wanted you to be on the show today, is because you just have such a great way of really being able to break it down and have it feel so much less intimidating.
Yeah, well, thanks for having me included in the show today.
Thank you, Steve. Thank you, Traci. You're listening to the Ask Brien radio show on KHS 1220 and 98.1 FM. Over and out. Till next week.